The world's smallest state possesses a power far greater than its physical size. Its army is almost non-existent, it has no production lines, and no underground natural resources. Yet its financial influence overshadows many superpowers. So how did the Vatican become one of the most powerful economic institutions in the world? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss these deep history and finance stories. Now let's return to the beginning of the story. Did the Vatican gain its economic power all at once? Or is there a long process behind it? Let us first examine how this power was formed. This power laid its foundations long before modern financial systems, in an era when money was not even paper yet. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church was not only a religious authority, it was also the center of law, education, and social order. People entrusted not only their beliefs but also their property, inheritances, and futures to the Church. Land donations, wills, and contributions made in exchange for the salvation of the soul enabled a massive accumulation of wealth over centuries. Thus, the Church became one of the largest landowners in Europe. These lands were not merely symbolic. They provided continuous cash flow to the Church through agricultural income, rental revenues, and taxes. However, the real turning point was hidden in the Church's pragmatic approach to money. Even the ban on interest could not stop financial circulation. The Church discovered and used indirect lending, custody, and commission systems. Even kings applied to the Church to finance their wars. This made the Church not only a spiritual force but also a political and economic balancing actor. The Vatican's present power is the result of this centuries-long silent accumulation. They did not need to be visible to be powerful. It was enough to determine the direction of money. What we see in this section is this. The Vatican never saw money as an end goal. It used it as a tool that had to be controlled. And this perspective caused it over time to become one of the most resilient economic structures in the world. It would be wrong to think that this massive wealth accumulated in the Middle Ages alone was enough to make the Vatican powerful. What truly made the difference was how this money was protected and how it was managed. While kingdoms in Europe collapsed easily and dynasties sank into debt, the Church's wealth hardly diminished. The biggest factor behind this was that the Vatican viewed money not as personal property but as an institutional trust. When a king died, his fortune could scatter. When an emperor fell, his treasury could be looted. But for the Church, the situation was quite different. Popes changed, eras ended, yet the institutional structure was preserved and the practices continued. This continuity created a financial memory. The Church recorded where money came from, where it went, and how it should be protected over centuries. The culture of accounting developed here long before modern banking. Another critical factor was that the Vatican built a network-based power rather than a purely geographic one. Wealth was not kept in a single place. Monasteries, bishoprics, and church-affiliated institutions spread across Europe. This structure resembled an early version of today's multinational corporations. When a crisis emerged in one region, other regions could keep the system standing. In addition, the Vatican transformed money into quiet influence rather than visible luxury. There were certainly magnificent palaces, but most of the wealth remained behind the scenes. This protected the Church from becoming a target. While kings failed to repay their debts, the Church became the creditor. While states were the ones going bankrupt from debt, the Church stood on the side that collected. In this section, we understand one thing very clearly. The Vatican owed its power not to the amount of money, but to its ability to operate a system that prevented money from scattering. Wealth grew because it was patient, durable, and governed not by emotions but by rules. This mindset made the Vatican resilient for centuries against economic fluctuations and threats. As time passed, the world order also changed. Kingdoms transformed into nation-states. Trade became globalized, and money became abstract. The Vatican did not watch this transformation from a distance. On the contrary, it stood among those who recognized the change early. The most critical step was the relationships established with modern banking. As Italian banking families rose in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Church chose cooperation rather than conflict with these families. Bankers such as the Medici were not only merchants, they also served as financial advisors to the popes. This relationship gave the Vatican a major advantage in financial instruments, credit networks, and international money transfers. However, the Vatican never became fully dependent on external banks. After centuries of experience, it established its own financial center. The structure known today as the Vatican Bank is not actually a religious bank but a closed financial institution created to manage church-owned assets. The primary objective there is not profit maximization but the protection and control of wealth. The Vatican deliberately avoided pushing money into high-risk investments. Instead of fast gains, it preferred long-term safe areas. Government bonds, real estate, and low-volatility investments became priorities. This approach became one of the most important factors that kept it standing during times of crisis. While countries struggled with hyperinflation during the world wars, the Vatican had already positioned most of its assets in ways that preserved real value. In addition, diplomatic immunity provided the Vatican with extra security in financial movements. While money recognized no borders, the Vatican's network also recognized no borders. This section shows us this. The Vatican did not attach itself to the modern financial system late. It used the system in a way that fit its own institutional reflexes. The secret of its survival in a changing world was not being carried away by the speed of money, but directing it toward its own controlled flow. Another factor that makes the Vatican's economic power unique is its invisible advantages. At the top of these are its legal and diplomatic status. The Vatican is not a corporation, nor is it a classical state. This hybrid form has given it flexibility in the financial world. While institutions in many countries are exposed to strict audits and political pressure, the Vatican has been able to preserve its room for maneuver thanks to diplomatic immunity and special agreements. This situation has provided a serious advantage in the protection of assets and the transfer of assets. In addition, instead of managing money from a single center, the Vatican built a multi-layered structure. Beyond official institutions, wealth was distributed through foundations, associations, and affiliated organizations. This distribution both reduced risks and limited transparency pressure. Another critical factor was access to information. For centuries, the Vatican collected data from bishoprics around the world. This network included not only religious but also economic, demographic, and political information. Long before modern intelligence organizations were established, the Vatican possessed a global information flow. This information was used to determine the timing and direction of investments. Which region was rising, which country was weakening, where instability existed. These were learned before the money moved. In the Vatican's investment decisions, statistics dominated more than emotion. Its ability to anticipate crises made it an actor that took positions in advance, rather than reacting afterward. In addition, the public perception of wealth was often misdirected. Although the Vatican was associated with luxury, the real power was in assets held quietly. Display attracts attention, and attention creates risk. The Vatican learned this truth very early. The summary of this section is this. Power is not only about having money, but also about making that money invisible. The Vatican sustained its economic power for centuries, precisely through this invisibility. To fully understand the Vatican's economic power, we need to point out one more thing. This institution never considered money as the sole ultimate goal. For the Vatican, money was part of a larger structure built between faith, influence, and continuity. For this reason, Vatican investments were often shaped outside the logic of classic profit maximization. Even when some investments did not produce direct financial returns, they generated long-term influence. Educational institutions, universities, hospitals, and cultural structures were parts of this strategy. These institutions produce social legitimacy on one hand and indirect economic value on the other. In addition, during times of crisis, the Vatican chose to remain steady rather than withdraw. When markets panicked and capital fled, the Vatican usually did not change its position. This moved it closer to the perception of a safe haven. Trust is more valuable than money in the financial world. People, states, and institutions turn to structures they trust in difficult times. The Vatican built this trust by acting consistently over hundreds of years. Another important factor was patience. For the Vatican, 5 or 10 years counted as short-term. Investments were planned with generations in mind. This perspective is a type of discipline that has almost disappeared in the modern financial world. Instead of rapid growth, slow but permanent expansion was preferred. That is why the Vatican's wealth often emerged even stronger after crises. Because when the system collapses, those who remain standing become more valuable. This section shows us clearly that the Vatican's strength comes from not being aggressive. It built a structure that does not force money, but allows money to work freely within the system over time. Economic resilience was achieved as a product of this long-horizon mindset. Today, when the Vatican's economic power is discussed, it is actually difficult to draw a clear picture through numbers alone, because this power is related more to the mindset that is preferred than to balance sheet items. The Vatican did not aim to be the richest institution in the world. It aimed to be the most resilient one. Throughout history, many structures that grew rapidly collapsed just as quickly. The Vatican, on the other hand, moved slowly, stayed quiet, and waited through crises. That is exactly what makes it different. Money never became an identity for the Vatican, because identity requires belief, continuity, and institutional memory. The economy functions like a skeleton that keeps this identity standing. It flexed when necessary, strengthened when necessary, but never moved ahead of the main structure. In the modern world, while states survive on debt and companies change direction under short-term profit pressure, the Vatican has remained one of the rare institutions capable of acting with century-old reflexes. This has given it time, and time is the most expensive asset in the financial world. The Vatican's power lies not in growing money, but in allowing money to grow itself. It does not rush, it does not panic, and it knows how to remain invisible. What makes it one of the most powerful economic institutions in the world today is not the size of the wealth it holds, but the fact that this wealth does not disappear. Because real power comes not from winning, but from not losing. And the Vatican learned this before anyone else. If you've watched this far, thank you sincerely. This story questions not only the Vatican, but also how we look at money. Because what we see is this: power is not always built by being loud, visible, or fast. Sometimes real power is hidden in staying quiet and not rushing. What do you think about this? Do you think the Vatican's power comes from financial intelligence, or from the trust it built over centuries? Be sure to write your opinion in the comments, because I'm truly curious about your view. Let me share a small secret as well. I read all the comments one by one. If you enjoy deep stories where history and finance intersect, I also recommend that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.